Hi everyone, welcome back to Lulumath. This video is on factoring trinomials of the form ax squared plus bx plus c by trial and error, and we're going to do something that I like to call unfoiling. Now, students tend to struggle with factoring trinomials because sometimes they don't necessarily make that connection that when you're factoring a trinomial, you're just undoing the distributing that you did before. So just like when we factored by GCF, you're undistributing. When you factor a trinomial, if you like to FOIL, then you're just essentially unfoiling. So with that being said, what background knowledge will I need? Well, I need to know how to multiply a binomial by a binomial. So I have two videos on multiplying binomials by binomials. One is on using FOIL, and the other one is on using a geometric model. So if you need a refresher, check them out. But for this specific video, I'm going to be referring back to the process of FOIL in order to be able to factor these trinomials. So in this example, we are asked to expand 2x plus 5 multiplied by 3x plus 1. Now, I'm not doing this as a refresher on how to FOIL, but it's really important that we understand how to move forward, because when we're unfoiling or factoring, we need to move backwards, back to this original problem here. So remember, FOIL, the first thing that we do in FOIL is we're going to multiply our firsts together. So 2x times 3x is going to give us 6x squared. Then we will do our outer, and we will multiply 2x by 1, so that gives us plus 2x. Then we're going to do our inner, so we're going to multiply 5 by 3x, and 5 times 3x is 15x, so that's our inner. And then we're going to do our last, which is 5 times 1, which is positive 5. We have our like terms, which is 2x and 15x, so together that will give us 17x. And then the 6x squared plus 17x plus 5 is going to be our final answer here. Now, really quickly, what's going to happen now when we're factoring, you're going to ask yourself, what binomials can I multiply together to get this expression, which is this one up here? So pretty much I will be given this expression here, and I'm going to try to bring it back to this binomial multiplied by this binomial. So if you notice, this 6x squared is coming from our first terms being multiplied together. This 5 is coming from our last terms being multiplied together. And this 17x that we have right here comes from our outer and our inner collected together. And this knowledge, this understanding is going to help us when we actually do some factoring. So let's get into it. So in this example, we're asked to factor 2x squared plus 9x plus 10 as the product of two different binomials. So remember, to factor, it means we're going to see what can I multiply together to give me this answer right here. So my goal right now is going to be to unfoil. So remember what we just talked about right here. Our first terms, this term and this term, are going to multiply together, and they're going to give me this 2x squared. So what can I multiply together to give me 2x squared? Well, I'm going to just look for factors of 2. What can I multiply together to give me 2? And I can only do 2 times 1. Those are the only factors of 2. We also know that our last terms here will multiply together to give us this 10 right here that we're looking for. So let's go ahead and see what are some numbers I can multiply together to give me 10. Well, I can do 1 and 10, or I can do 2 and 5. And then we know that our outer and our inner together are going to combine to end up giving us this 9x that we're looking for right here in the middle over here. So because this is trial and error, we're going to go ahead and start our first trial. So for trial number 1, the nice thing about this 2 is that my only options are just 2 and 1. So I'm going to put a 2 here and a 1 here. But I wanted to multiply together to give me 2x squared. So I could either put an x squared here and nothing here, or I can put nothing here and put an x squared here, or I can put an x here and an x here, which is what I'm going to want to do, because when I do my outer and I do my inner, they have to be like terms, which means that this x and this x have to match. We know they have to be like terms because they have to collect together to give us this 9x, which is a single term. All right, now we know our last terms should multiply together to give us 10. So I can either try 1 and 10 or 2 and 5. So I'll just try a 1 here and I'll try a 10 here. Now our outer and our inner should add up together to give us 9x. So let's see what our outer and our inner are going to give us. So this 2x multiplied by this 10 is going to give us 20x, okay? And this 1 multiplied by this 1x is going to give us 1x. And I want to get 9x. Now, depending on the signs, this 1x and this 20x can either add together or subtract depending on whether the signs match. Regardless, if you add 1x and 20x together, you get 21x or negative 21x depending on the signs. And if you were to subtract, you would either get positive 19x because 20 minus 1 is 19, or you would get negative 19x because 1 minus 20 is negative 19. Any of those combinations will not give us this 9x we're looking for. So trial number 1 is not going to work. And that's okay. The more you do these types of questions, the easier it'll come to you, the less trial you'll have to do. But at first, you just have to stay persistent and try as much as you can until you get to the final correct answer. So let's do a second trial. So trial number 2. Now, because this has a 2x right here, when we first did this, if I swap the 10 with the 1 right here, now I'm going to be multiplying the 2x by a different number. So I'm going to try to swap the 1 and the 10 first before I try any other combinations. So I'm still going to keep this 2x here, and I'm still going to keep this x here, but instead of 1 and 10, I'm going to do 10 here, and I'm going to do 1 here. So let's go ahead and do our outside. So our outside here, 2x times 1 gives us 2x, and our inner here, 10 times x, gives us 10x. And again, there's no way I can get a 9x from a 10x and a 2x. So that means trial number 2 also is not going to work for us. All right, let's go ahead and do our third trial right here. Again, I'm just going to use 2x and x because those are my only options here. Now, we've exhausted 2 and 1 with 1 and 10, all possible combinations in trials 1 and 2. So we're going to cross off this 1 and 10 and say that we know that that's not going to work. And then we'll go ahead and try 2 and 5 for our last terms here. So I'll put a 2 here, and I'll put a 5 there. Now, same thing, let's do our outside terms. So 2x times 5 is 10x, and let's do our inner terms. 2 times x is 2x, and there's no way that 2x and 10x will ever give us this 9x that we're looking for. So that means trial number 3 does not work either. All right, let's give this another shot. So again, for my first terms, I'm going to use 2x and x like I did in all my other trials. And this time I'm going to swap the 2 with the 5 and see what ends up happening. So I'll put the 5 here and I'll put the 2 here. Well, when I do my outer, 2x times 2 is 4x. And when I do my inner, 5 times x is 5x, and my goal is to get this 9x, and I can get a 9x from 5x and 4x if the 5x is positive and the 4x is also positive. Now, we worry about our signs once we figure out what outer and inner values will give us this 9x that we're looking for. So again, because the 5x here is positive, and the 5x results from multiplying this 5 right here by this x right here, then we know that both 5 and x either both have to be positive or both have to be negative. Well, if I want this 2x squared right here to be positive, then I want this 2x and this x to be positive as well, which means that this 5 also has to be positive because a positive times a positive has to give us that positive that we're looking for. Similarly, this 4x comes from multiplying the 2x with the 2, and since we want the 2x times the 2 to be positive, this 2 has to be positive right here, making 2x plus 5 times x plus 2 our final answer. Really quickly, I just want to give a little tip to help make things a little bit easier for you when you are factoring. If you notice, our original problem does not have a GCF. 2x squared, 9x, and 10 have nothing in common. If you look at trial number 2 right here, we had this 2x and this 10 right here, and 2x and 10 have a common factor. They're both divisible by 2. However, the original problem did not have a common factor, which means that my binomial cannot have a common factor either. So I wouldn't even have to figure out the outer and the inner at all in trial number 2. Seeing that I have a common factor in my binomial, but there's no common factor in the original problem, automatically tells me this trial does not work. Same thing in trial number 3. We have 2x plus 2. This binomial here has a common factor of 2, which will automatically tell us trial number 3 does not work. In our next example, where we're asked to factor x squared plus x minus 20, we have a leading coefficient of 1 here, which actually will end up making this process a little bit easier. So remember, our goal, again, is to unFOIL. So when I have my binomial multiplied by my binomial, I know that my first term multiplied by my first term will together give me this 1x squared that I'm looking for, which is nice because the only numbers I can multiply together to give me 1 are just 1 and 1. I know that this negative 20 right here is going to come from my last terms. So my last terms are going to multiply together to give me negative 20. Now, at this point in time, I'm not going to worry about the fact that this is negative. That's going to be the last thing that I'm going to think about as I'm finalizing my answer. So what are some numbers I can multiply together to give me 20? What are some factors of 20? Well, I can divide 20 by 1 and I get 20. So 1 times 20 is 20. I can do 2 times 10 and that'll give me 20 as well. 20 is not divisible by 3, but it is divisible by 4, so I can use 4 times 5. And now 5 is the next number, but it's in my chart, so I've covered all of my factors. Now, we know that the outer and the inner are going to add up together to give us this x that we have right here. Well, again, this x has an invisible coefficient of 1, so we want it to add up to give us 1x. So let's go ahead and do our first trial. In order to get this x squared right here, my only options are 1 and 1, so I'm going to have 1x and 1x. I can just say x and x. And then I know that my last terms are going to multiply together to give me 20, a negative 20. So I'm going to try 1 and 20. And I'm going to determine my outer, which is going to be x times 20, so I get 20x, and my inner, which is going to be 1 times x, so I'm going to get x, and I'm trying to get 1x from this x and this 20x, and the only numbers I can get are positive 21x, if the signs are both positive, negative 21x if they're both negative. If the x is negative and the 20x is positive, I would get 19x. And if the x was positive and the 20x was negative, I would get negative 19x. Regardless, this is telling me that our first trial is not going to work. So let's go ahead and try our second trial right here. So I will put x and x again. Now, because this was 1x in trial number 1 and this is 1x, if I were to swap the 1 and the 20, nothing would change because I'm still multiplying this 20 by the 1x, and I'm still multiplying this 1 by the 1x, which is why this 1x squared, this leading coefficient of 1, is so much easier. So we can cross off 1 and 20 and we can say, nope, we're done, that's not going to work. Let's try the 2 and the 10. So I'll place the 2 here and I'll place the 10 here. My outer terms are going to multiply together to give me 10x. My inner terms are going to multiply 2 times x gives me 2x, and I cannot get a 1x from that either, so this is not going to work as well. So let's do our third trial. So I will put x and x in here again, and this time I know 2 and 10 won't work. Swapping them, same thing, is not going to work. So let's try a 4 and a 5. So my outer is going to be x times 5, which is 5x, and my inner is going to be 4 times x, which is 4x, and if I have a negative 4x and a positive 5x, I know that 5 minus 4 is going to give us the one that we want, so we know that this is going to be a success. Now, because this 4x has to be negative, that means that this 4 right here also has to be negative, so this will be a minus 4. And because this 5x has to be positive, that means that this 5 right here also has to be positive, so we're going to write plus 5. So that means that our final answer is x minus 4 times x plus 5. Now, the nice thing about this leading coefficient of 1 is I don't really need to do all of these outer and inner because negative 4 and positive 5 right here give us the one that we're looking for. But this only works if our leading coefficient here is 1. All right, so in our next example, this x squared minus 10x plus 24, remember our goal is to unFOIL. Now, we know that if we multiply our first terms together here, we will end up getting this x squared. And if we multiply our last terms together here, we will end up getting this positive 24. Okay, so x squared is just 1x squared. I don't have to make a chart for that. But for 24, we'll make a chart of all the factors of 24. 1 multiplied by 24 is 24. I can do 2 times 12. 24 is divisible by 3. We can do 3 times 8. 24 is divisible by 4. We can do 4 times 6. Now, 24 is not divisible by 5. So the next number that we have is 6, but it's in our chart. So we found all the factors. Now, our outer and our inner should add up together to give us this term right here in the middle, which is negative 10x. So let's go ahead and see what we can do. So we want an x here and we want an x here. Now, because this is 1x and 1x, it'll make things easier for us. We can look at our chart and just simply find the values that will possibly give us this negative 10 that we're looking for. Well, I can't get a negative 10 from a 1 and a 24, and I can't get a negative 10 from a 3 and an 8. So my next options are just 2 and 12 or 4 and 6. So I'm going to try the 2 here, and I will try the 12 here, and I'm going to actually show the outer and the inner to see what ends up happening. So for outer, I would do x multiplied by 12, which is 12x. For my inner, I would do 2 times x, which is 2x. And I can get a negative 10x if the 12x was negative and the 2x was positive. Well, if the 2x is positive, that means that this 2 would have to be positive. And if the 12x was negative, that means that this 12 would have to be negative. And 2 times negative 12 is a negative 24, but we're looking for a positive 24. So that tells us that this is incorrect. Now let's go ahead and set up another set of binomial multiplied by a binomial. So for this one right here, again, we're still going to use x multiplied by x, and we're going to try the 4 and the 6 here. So I'll put a 4 here, and I will put a 6 here. For my outer terms being multiplied together, x times 6 is 6x, and for my inner, 4 times x is 4x, and if the 4x was negative and the 6x was also negative, I will get the negative 10x that I'm looking for, which means that this 4x right here, this negative 4x will make this 4 a minus 4, and this negative 6x that we have here will make this 6 a negative 6. And if I were to multiply negative 4 by negative 6, I get the positive 24 that I'm looking for, which means that this is the correct answer. So my final answer will be x minus 4 multiplied by x minus 6. So in our next example, we have 6x squared minus 7x minus 5. And remember, our goal when we're factoring is to unFOIL. Now we know that this 6x squared is going to come from multiplying our first term in each binomial together. So 6x squared will be our first. I'm going to make a chart for 6. So I can do 1 multiplied by 6, or I can do 2 times 3. We also know that this negative 5 that we have here is going to come from our last terms that we will multiply together. So we know our last will be negative 5. But again, we're not going to worry about the fact that this is negative until we get to the final stages of our factoring. So what are some numbers I can multiply together to give me 5? Well, 5 is nice. It's a prime number, so I just need to do 1 and 5. Now, we know that our outer and our inner terms, that they are going to add up together to give us this negative 7x. So let's go ahead and start our first trial. This is going to be one where we have to really double check to make sure that our outer and our inner add up to negative 7x because of this leading coefficient of 6. It's not going to be as clear cut as it was in the last two examples. So I'm going to start with 1 times 6 for my first terms. So I'll try 1x, or just x, multiplied by 6x. And then for my last terms, I only have 1 and 5 as my option. So I'm going to put 1 here and 5 there. So our outer term is going to be x times 5, which is 5x. And now let's do our inner. 1 times 6x is 6x. And there's no way that I can get a negative 7x from a 6x and a 5x. So I know that this is a bust. It's not going to work. All right, we need to still place the x here and the 6x here, because if I were to swap the 5 and the 1, now 6x times 1 versus 6x times 5 will give us different values for our outer and our inner. So I'll put the 5 here and the 1 here, and when I do my outer, x times 1 is 1x, and when I do my inner, 5 times 6x is 30x. 30 and x will never give us this negative 7x that we want, so trial number 2 does not work. So for trial number 3, we've exhausted the possibility of having 1 and 6 combined with 1 and 5. So 1 and 6 we know won't work. We know 1 and 5 have to work because that's our only option. So now we're going to try and see what happens if I use 2x and 3x. So again, I will put the 1 here and I'll put the 5 here. So for my outer, 2x times 5 is 10x. And then for my inner, 1 times 3x is 3x. And I can get a negative 7x from those numbers if the 3x is positive and the 10x is negative. Well, this positive 3x right here is going to tell us that this 1 right here is positive, and this negative 10x right here is going to tell us that this 5 right here is negative. So that gives us our final answer. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please comment below or reach out at lulumath.com, where you can also find blank or completed notes from this video. If this was useful to you, please don't forget to subscribe for more videos and share with your peers. Thank you. See you next time. So for trial number 2,